My name is Temperance Holloway, and today I'm 75 years old. Before I dive into what happened, I'd like to ask you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I always wonder who's out there listening to my memories. What I'm about to tell you took place in 1971, when I was 48. To outsiders, my life looked calm and respectable, almost like something out of one of those perfect family postcards. I lived in a small historic town in Virginia called Millfield. I had been married to my husband Walter for more than 2 decades. He owned the local general store, the place everyone in town passed through sooner or later. We had a son, Vincent, who was 17 at the time. He was a good boy, polite, a dedicated student who dreamed of studying law. Our house was just a couple of blocks from the main church. Every Sunday we attended service, then walked home for a family lunch. People in town would smile at us and say, "Mr. Walter and Mrs. Temperance, what a fine couple." Walter was always neatly dressed in his brown suit and hat. He woke early, went to the store, came back for dinner. I stayed home most days, cooking, cleaning, embroidering, and sometimes helping him at the counter if he had errands. We didn't have the internet or smartphones or any of the things people can't live without today. Our telephone was a heavy black thing that sat on a small table in the living room, and when it rang, it felt like the whole neighborhood knew. For a long time, I believed I knew my husband completely. After all, how could you live more than 20 years with someone and not know who they truly are? I trusted him with everything: my home, my finances, my health, my future. But on March 12, 1971, a cloudy Friday that threatened rain, that illusion shattered. I was alone at home. Walter had gone to a neighboring town, Crestwood, on business, saying he'd be back in the evening. I took advantage of his absence to do a deep cleaning and to look for some land papers we needed for the county clerk. That search took me to his locked desk drawer, to a porcelain pot hiding a small key, and eventually to a large brown envelope with my name on it, an envelope that contained my own funeral contract, a death certificate already half filled out, and a handwritten obituary describing my brave fight against illness. And on one of those papers, in faint pencil, I saw it, a date 3 days ahead, the scheduled day of my death. I thought the worst was finding my own obituary, but the real horror was discovering how my husband planned to kill me. In the next part, I'll tell you what I uncovered about the tea he lovingly brought me every night. When I realized that date was only 3 days away, it felt like the floor disappeared beneath my feet. I sat on the bed with the papers spread around me, my hands shaking so much I could barely keep the documents from slipping. A cedar coffin with golden handles, a wreath of flowers, candles, a reserved viewing room. Every detail of my funeral was already paid for. The partially completed death certificate was even worse. My full name, my parents' names, my marital status, everything accurate. Only the exact date and time of death were blank. The cause of death, however, was already written in the familiar handwriting of Dr. Mitchell, our family physician and Walter's friend. Cardiac arrest following prolonged illness. That line made me feel almost sick. I was not some seriously ill woman. Yes, I had been more tired in recent years, with occasional dizziness and a strange fogginess in my head. But I always believed it was age, housework, and stress. Dr. Mitchell had been visiting monthly, telling me I had a weak heart and advising rest. I trusted him like I trusted my husband. But with those documents in my hand, everything started to line up differently. The symptoms, the visits, the weak heart. Then another memory hit me like a slap. For 3 years, Walter had insisted on preparing a special herbal tea for me every night before bed. He'd bring it in a cup, steaming and fragrant, saying it was chamomile with lemon balm from our own yard to help me sleep. He would stand there, watching me, gently insisting, "Drink it all, Temperance. You need your rest." After drinking that tea, I always felt unusually drowsy. My thoughts grew heavy, my body slack, my tongue thick. I woke up with a dry mouth and a pounding head, blaming my age. But on that day, as I stared at my own funeral plans, I realized the truth I hadn't wanted to see. He had been poisoning me slowly. I forced myself to put everything back in the envelope, lock the drawer, and return the key to the porcelain pot, just as I'd found it. If Walter sensed I had discovered his plan, my chances of survival would drop to 0. That night, when he came home and served dinner as if nothing were wrong, I smiled and played my part, terrified on the inside. Later, as usual, he brought me a fresh cup of that same tea, only this time I didn't intend to swallow it. That night, I pretended to drink the poison meant to kill me, but I secretly saved some. In the next part, I'll tell you who helped me uncover exactly what was in that innocent-looking tea. Walter came into the kitchen that night holding the steaming cup like a caring husband. "Your tea, Temperance," he said with that calm smile I now found sinister. Mercedes, our housekeeper, was cleaning up in the background, humming softly as if nothing in the world was wrong. I took the cup with trembling hands and brought it to my lips. Walter watched closely. I could feel his eyes on me, almost counting my sips. "It's too hot," I said, pretending to blow on it. "I'll drink it when it cools a little." He seemed satisfied and went to the living room to listen to his favorite radio news program. The moment I felt his attention leave the doorway, I quickly poured most of the tea down the sink, saving a small amount in an empty medicine bottle I found in the cabinet. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. As soon as I hid the little bottle inside my apron pocket, I rinsed the cup, left a faint trace of tea and foam, and set it aside as if it had been fully drunk. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay beside Walter, my eyes shut, my breathing slow, imitating the heavy slumber he was used to seeing. His snores filled the darkness. Each sound made me more angry and more determined. This man, who had vowed to love and protect me, had been carefully scheduling my death like an appointment on a calendar. The next morning, I told him I planned to visit my sister Constance. Normally, he complained when I stayed too long at her house, claiming she put ideas in my head. That day, however, he didn't protest. He just shrugged and said, "Go ahead. I'll be busy at the store anyway." Perhaps in his mind, 3 days was all I had left. I walked across town with that little bottle hidden in my purse. At Constance's house, I showed her the funeral documents and then the tea sample. At first, she tried to rationalize everything. "Maybe Walter just planned ahead. You know how cautious he is. Maybe the doctor exaggerated about your heart." But when I pointed at the penciled date, only 3 days away, and reminded her how Walter insisted I drink that tea every night under his watchful eye, even she couldn't deny something was horribly wrong. We decided not to go to the sheriff yet. We needed proof. And in Millfield, there was one man who knew more about strange liquids than anyone else. Old Mr. Anderson, the town pharmacist. I told the pharmacist a little lie about a sick dog, but his face turned pale when he tested the liquid. In the next part, I'll reveal what he found inside that tea and how that discovery pushed me deeper into the nightmare. Constance and I went straight to Mr. Anderson's pharmacy. He was an elderly man with thick glasses and white hair, always wearing a spotless white coat. Everyone in town trusted him. I was still too afraid to confess the whole story, so I disguised it. "Mr. Anderson," I said, holding up the small bottle, "my dog drank this by accident, and now he's terribly weak and sleepy. Could you check what's in it?" He uncapped the bottle, sniffed it, then placed a drop on a glass slide and held it up to the light. He mixed in some reagents with a practiced hand. His friendly expression slowly disappeared. "Where did this dog find this, Mrs. Holloway?" he asked in a much more serious tone. I hesitated, then managed. "It's from home. It's a tea I found there." He looked at me over the top of his glasses and sighed. "This is not just tea. There's a strong dose of phenobarbital in here. It's a medication used for epilepsy and sedation. In small doses under a doctor's care, it can be safe. But in repeated high doses like this, over time, it could weaken someone's heart, cause confusion, extreme drowsiness, and eventually kill them." "Would it look like a natural heart problem?" I asked quietly. "Yes," he said. It could be mistaken for natural cardiac failure, especially if a doctor was already convinced the patient had heart trouble. Then he fixed his eyes on me. "You didn't give this to a dog, did you, Mrs. Holloway?" I shook my head. "No, Mr. Anderson, I don't even own a dog." He didn't ask more questions. He simply said, "Be very careful, and don't drink anything you don't prepare yourself." Leaving the pharmacy, I felt both terrified and strangely relieved. The poison was real. I wasn't imagining things. Walter wasn't just being overly cautious with funeral plans. He was planning a perfect crime. But the question remained, why now? Why this particular March? The answer came a little later that same day when Constance and I visited Harrison Funeral Home to confirm something I'd seen in that drawer. Mr. Jerome, the funeral director, pulled out a thick folder with Walter's name on it and frowned. "Your husband has been coming here every March since 1965, he explained. "He arranges a full funeral, pays everything up front, then returns in April to cancel and loses the deposit. It's unusual, but he always says he's grateful he didn't need the service after all." Every year, the same pattern. A funeral for me prepared in March, canceled in April. And this year, unlike the others, we were already 3 days away from the scheduled date, and he had not canceled anything. The funeral contracts showed a chilling 6-year pattern, but I still didn't know the real reason behind it. In the next part, I'll tell you how following Walter to another city exposed a secret family and a twisted superstition. The next day, Walter announced he needed to drive to Richmond on Sunday to buy merchandise for the store. That was strange enough. He almost never personally went on Sundays. Usually, he sent the delivery boy during the week. Trying to sound casual, I asked, "Could I go with you? It's been so long since I've seen the city." He stiffened. "No, Temperance, it's a work trip. Suppliers, invoices, warehouses, nothing fun. You'd be bored." I pretended to insist for a moment, then backed off. "All right, I'll visit Constance instead." He seemed relieved. "Good. Go see your sister. I'll be back late." The moment he left in his blue Chevrolet, I phoned Constance. Her husband, John, had returned from a trucking job and agreed, although reluctantly, to drive us to Richmond in his truck. "We're going to follow Walter," I said. "I have to know where he really goes." We took a faster route and waited at the entrance of the city. When we finally saw the familiar blue Chevrolet pass, we let him get ahead and then followed at a distance. Instead of heading to a commercial district filled with warehouses, Walter drove into a quiet residential neighborhood called Forest Hills. He parked in front of a yellow house, number 427, and got out carrying gift bags. A young blonde woman opened the door. She was heavily pregnant, at least 7 months along. They kissed on the mouth and embraced. Moments later, 3 little girls ran to him shouting, "Daddy!" My breath caught in my chest. My husband, the man who slept in my bed, who said he loved me, who claimed we couldn't afford to hire more help at the store, had a second family. We watched for hours from a distance. Walter played with the girls in the yard, helped the woman in the kitchen, acted exactly like a devoted husband and father. As if Millfield, our home, and our son Vincent barely existed. When he finally left at dusk, kissing the woman and the children goodbye, I decided I couldn't just walk away. Against John and Constance's protests, I went up to the yellow house and knocked on the door. The blonde woman answered, a polite smile on her face. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" "Do you know a man named Walter Holloway?" I asked. "Of course," she said. "My brother-in-law. He just left. Are you a friend of his?" "My name is Temperance," I replied. "I am Walter's wife." Her face turned white. The woman thought Walter was a widower caring for his late brother's family, but the truth was much darker. In the next part, I'll reveal the lies he told her, the superstition his mother planted in his mind, and why March 15th was the date chosen for my death. The woman invited me in, trembling. Her name was Meline. The living room walls were covered with family photos, Meline with a man I didn't recognize, children's birthdays, and several pictures of Walter, smiling and relaxed. She sat down heavily and tried to defend the story she'd been told. "Walter is my brother-in-law," she insisted. His brother, Anthony, was my husband. Anthony died in an accident years ago. Walter promised to take care of us. Anthony doesn't exist, I said quietly. Walter married me 22 years ago. We have a 17-year-old son. While he was building a life with me in Millfield, he was also building a second life with you. Maline's world shattered right in front of me. When the tears slowed enough for her to speak, she began explaining what Walter had told her. He had appeared in her life in 1964, supposedly as a grieving brother-in-law supporting his late brother's widow. Over time, he became a friend, then a lover. The three little girls called him Dad, and now she was expecting his fourth child. And he always says, she added, that once his sick sister in Millfield dies, he'll finally marry me properly. He says she has a weak heart and doesn't have long. That phrase, sick sister, hit me like a hammer. In his version of the story, I had been turned into a fragile, doomed relative waiting conveniently to die. Maline and I searched through Walter's things in that house, receipts, letters, insurance forms. Among them were letters from his late mother, Beatrice, a woman people in town had often whispered about, calling her a healer, almost a witch. In those letters, she wrote about a strange condition for Walter to be able to exchange families without being cursed. He needed, she wrote, to have a male child with the new woman before he could let go of the old life. If he killed his first wife too soon, before that boy was born, he would be cursed forever. With me, Walter already had a son, Vincent. But with Maline, he only had daughters, Christine, Mary, and Amy. Every time she became pregnant, he would arrange my funeral in March, expecting the baby to be a boy. When it turned out to be a girl, he canceled the funeral in April and postponed the crime. Now, Maline was pregnant again. Walter must have convinced himself that this time the baby would be a boy. That's why March 15th, 1971 was penciled as my death date. He had also taken out a large life insurance policy in my name and quietly embezzled money from our store, forging my signature on land sales to finance this second household. Maline realized she too had been a victim, not a co-conspirator. We left that house that night with a shared understanding. Walter was dangerous, and any of us could end up dead if we didn't act. Armed with proof of poisoning, secret contracts, and a second family, I finally went to the authorities. In the next part, I'll tell you how we set a trap for Walter on the very night he thought I would die. On the morning of March 15th, the day marked for my heart failure, I went to the sheriff's office in Millfield. Sheriff Finnegan was a stern man with a thick mustache and a skeptical gaze, but he listened as I laid out everything. The funeral contracts, the death certificate, the poison tea, the other family enrichment, the life insurance, the embezzled money. He studied the documents carefully. "These are serious accusations, Mrs. Holloway," he said. "Mr. Holloway is respected in this town, you know that." "That's exactly why I brought proof," I replied. "If you don't help me, the next time you hear my name, it will be on a real obituary." After a long silence, he nodded. "If what you're saying is true, your husband isn't just a cheat, he's a criminal. But we need to catch him in the act, or a clever lawyer will twist all of this." Together we built a plan. That night, I would accept the tea as usual and pretend to drink it. Later, I'd stage a collapse. Our housekeeper, Mercedes, who had always distrusted Walter and called him Snake Eyes, would be present to witness everything. She would run to call Dr. Mitchell, who had already agreed with Walter to sign my death certificate. Sheriff Finnegan arranged for officers to hide in the house. They would wait until the moment Dr. Mitchell declared me dead and filled in the final details on the certificate. Only then would they reveal themselves and arrest them both. That entire day, I moved through the house like a ghost. Walter paced restlessly, left early for the store, came back for lunch, barely touched his food, then left again. In the afternoon, I saw him from the window digging in the backyard. Later, the sheriff would uncover a metal container buried there holding $20,000 in cash. His emergency fund once I was out of the way. Before dinner, He handed me a new dress he had bought. "To make you look even more beautiful," he said with a soft smile. That dress was meant to be my burial outfit. He also hugged Vincent that evening in an unusually emotional way. "Always be a good man, son. Honor the family name," he told the boy, who looked puzzled. Walter was not a man of tender speeches. Then came the moment I had been dreading all day, the arrival of the tea. That night, while the police hid in my own house, Walter mixed an extra strong dose into my cup. In the next part, I'll show you how we faked my death and how he reacted when he thought his plan had finally worked. Walter prepared the tea in the kitchen, thinking no one was paying attention, but Mercedes quietly watched him. She later told the court how she saw him crush 3 pills and stir them thoroughly into the cup, more than he had ever used before. He carried the tea to me with a rehearsed gentleness. "Here, Temperance, drink it while it's still hot." My hands were steady this time. Fear was still there, but so was a strange calm. I raised the cup, pretended to sip, and made a satisfied sound. "It's good, Walter. Thank you." While he watched, I tilted the cup just enough for a little to touch my lips, but not enough to swallow any real amount. When he seemed satisfied, he told me, "You should lie down. You look tired." As planned, I went to the bedroom, fully dressed, and lay on the bed. After a few minutes, Mercedes rushed in, calling for Walter. "Mr. Holloway, come quick! Your wife's very sick." Walter hurried in, putting on his worried husband mask. I began to fake convulsions, shaking and foaming at the mouth, using a little toothpaste mixed with water at the corner of my lips. His eyes shone with something that looked alarmingly like triumph beneath the fake concern. "Call Dr. Mitchell," he shouted. The doctor arrived sooner than any real emergency would have allowed, another sign he'd been warned in advance. He barely examined me. Without checking properly, he sighed and said in a solemn tone, "I'm sorry, Walter." Her heart finally gave out. Walter embraced him, pretending to cry. "She suffered so much, Doctor. Maybe it's better this way." Dr. Mitchell took the pre-prepared death certificate from his bag, writing in the date and time, March 15th, 1971, 7:35 p.m. Cause of death, cardiac arrest following prolonged illness. The moment his pen left the paper, a voice thundered from the doorway, "Police! Don't move!" Sheriff Finnegan and 2 officers entered the room. Walter's face drained of color. Dr. Mitchell froze, still holding the certificate. Then I did the thing neither of them thought possible. I sat up, alive, fully conscious. Walter stared at me as if he were seeing a ghost. How is this possible?" "I didn't drink your poison this time, Walter," I said. "And now everyone knows about Malene, the insurance, the stolen money, the whole plan you've been building for 6 years." That night ended with handcuffs and shocked faces, but the real battle had just begun. In the next part, I'll take you inside the trial where the town chose whose version of the truth they would believe. Part 9. News in a small town travels faster than any car. By dawn, Millfield already knew. Walter from the general store and Dr. Mitchell, the trusted local physician, had been arrested for trying to kill me. People stared when I walked down the street. Some looked at me with pity, others with doubt, as if wondering whether I had exaggerated everything. My son Vincent was devastated. He had grown up admiring his father, and now he had to process that this same man had plotted to murder his mother and had an entire second family hidden away. 3 months later, in June 1971, the trial began in the old courthouse on the main square. It seemed like the entire town squeezed into that creaking wooden room. I sat in the front row in a simple navy suit, my hair pulled back, determined not to appear broken. Vincent sat beside me in a suit and tie, suddenly looking older than his 17 years. Walter had hired the most expensive lawyer in the region, Mr. Owens using whatever funds he had left. He sat at the defense table in a gray suit, thinner and with dark circles under his eyes, but still trying to project the image of the respectable businessman. The prosecutor, Mr. Harrison, laid out the charges: attempted homicide, fraud, and forgery. Dr. Mitchell faced charges of complicity in falsifying documents. One by one, the witnesses testified. Sheriff Finnegan described the plan: the hidden officers, the stage collapse, and the moment they caught Walter and the doctor finalizing my official death. Mr. Jerome, the funeral director, confirmed the annual pattern of fully paid funerals in my name every March since 1965, always. Cancelled in April. The courtroom murmured when he said it had become almost a tradition for Walter. Mr. Anderson, the pharmacist, then explained how he found a dangerous concentration of phenobarbital in the tea sample. He carefully described how repeated doses could cause confusion, extreme fatigue, and eventually a heart attack that might look natural, especially if a doctor was already convinced of heart problems. Mercedes, our housekeeper, testified that she had seen Walter crushing the pills and mixing them into the tea on the night of March 15th. She imitated the strange little smile on his face as he watched me drink, a detail that made several people in the audience shudder. But perhaps the most dramatic moments were still to come, when Malene and I took the stand. The court had heard about poison and forged documents, but not yet about Walter's second home, his fake widow, and a curse that demanded a baby boy. In the next part, I'll tell you what came out when we testified. When the bailiff called Malene to the stand, whispers rippled through the courtroom. She had recently given birth to her fourth child, a girl, and looked exhausted, her face pale and her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Some people muttered words like mistress and homewrecker, even though they knew nothing of what she had suffered. Under oath, Malene told her side of the story. She described meeting Walter in 1964 when she was a young shop worker in Richmond. He approached her not as a married man, but as a concerned brother-in-law, inventing an imaginary sibling named Anthony. When she became pregnant, he spun a tale of tragedy. Anthony supposedly died, leaving her a widow. Walter then stepped in as protector, slowly transforming that role into that of lover and partner. She said Walter had promised that one day they would marry, but only after his sick sister in Millfield passed away. He told her that this sister had a weak heart and wouldn't live long. In reality, of course, that sister was me. Then Malene spoke of the superstition Walter's mother had instilled in him, the belief that he could only safely change families if he had a male child with the new woman. If he killed his first wife earlier, before that boy was born, some terrible curse would supposedly fall upon him. The courtroom reacted with uneasy laughter and murmurs. The judge had to bang his gavel for silence. The story sounded almost absurd, yet it perfectly matched the pattern of funeral contracts and pregnancies. Each time Malene carried a baby, Walter prepared my funeral in March. Every time a girl was born, he canceled in April and postponed my death. When it was my turn to take the stand, I felt every eye in the room on me. I shared how I had found the envelope, the funeral contract, the half-completed death certificate, and the handwritten obituary describing a long illness I did not have. I described the years of fatigue and foggy thinking, the nightly tea, my visit to Mr. Anderson, the trip to Richmond, and the discovery of Walter's secret family. The defense attorney tried to paint me as jealous, unstable, even vengeful. "Isn't it convenient," he suggested, "that all this proof appeared just when your marriage was supposedly troubled?" I answered calmly, pointing out that these weren't just suspicions. They were documents, contracts, chemical tests, and the doctor's own pre-filled certificate. I reminded the court that I had been pronounced dead while wide awake. By the time I stepped down, the courtroom no longer saw me as a hysterical wife. They saw me as a woman who had almost been buried alive by a man she trusted. The last people to testify were the two men at the center of it all, Walter and Dr. Mitchell. In the next part, I'll show you how their own words sealed their fate. Walter finally took the stand. For more than 20 years, I had heard his voice inside our home, giving orders at the store, asking what was for dinner. Now I listened to that same voice try to rewrite reality. At first, he denied everything. He insisted the funeral contracts were just precautionary planning for his family. The tea, he claimed, was only meant to help me sleep. He minimized his visits to Richmond, calling Malene someone I helped out of charity. But the prosecutor was patient and methodical. He confronted Walter with the letters from his mother about the required male child, with the repeated pattern of funeral contracts, with the life insurance policy taken out in my name, and with the forged land sale documents. Piece by piece, the facade began to crack. Then came the question that changed everything. "Is it true," the prosecutor asked, "that your mother told you you'd only escape her curse if you had a male child with this other woman before your wife died?" Walter hesitated, glancing around the room. At last, he muttered, "My mother, she had visions. Said I could only start a new life when I had a son with Malene. Said if I got rid of temperance before that, I'd be cursed." It wasn't a straightforward confession, but it was close. He admitted he believed in this twisted condition and that my death was somehow a necessary step toward his new life. The prosecutor followed up. "So, you admit you planned for your wife's death?" Walter didn't say yes outright, but his silence spoke louder than any denial. Dr. Mitchell, unlike Walter, did not have the strength to maintain the lie. On the stand, he crumbled. He confessed that he had been in debt, involved in gambling. Walter had offered him money in exchange for cooperation. He was to support the idea that I had a weak heart and eventually sign a death certificate without thorough examination. "No, Your Honor," Dr. Mitchell finally said when the judge asked if I had any real heart condition. "Her problem wasn't her heart. She was being poisoned, and I knew it. I chose money over ethics, and I will regret it for the rest of my life." 3 weeks after the trial began, Judge Hamilton pronounced the verdict. Walter was found guilty of attempted murder, embezzlement, and forgery. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Dr. Mitchell received an 8-year sentence for complicity and falsifying documents. As they were led away in handcuffs, I did not feel happiness, only an overwhelming sense of relief. I had survived. The trial ended, but the consequences were only beginning. In the next part, I'll tell you how I rebuilt my life from ruins, with gossip all around me and almost no money left. After the verdict, silence settled over my life in a new and heavy way. The store that had supported our family for years was revealed to be riddled with debts. Walter had siphoned off money for so long that we were barely staying afloat. Suppliers no longer trusted us, and the business collapsed quickly. The court eventually returned the $20,000 found buried in our backyard. It kept Vincent and me afloat in the first months, but it wasn't a fortune. Not when you considered legal costs, daily expenses, and a son dreaming of law school. Socially, things were just as difficult. Some people treated me as a curiosity, a living headline. Others whispered that I must have done something terrible to make my husband lose his mind like that. There were those who even suggested I had exaggerated his crimes to keep the store money for myself. In small towns, people often prefer a dramatic rumor to a simple truth. Vincent struggled as well. In Richmond, where he eventually went to study law, some classmates mocked him, calling him the murderer's son. He came home once with a bruised eye and shrugged it off, but I knew words had hurt far worse than fists. Faced with shrinking savings and the need for independence, I rummaged through old boxes one day and found my mother's wedding gift. An old black Singer sewing machine with golden designs. Memories flooded back. Years of making clothes for myself and for Vincent when we couldn't afford store-bought garments. I set the machine on a table, ran my fingers over the cool metal, and thought, why not? At first, I did small jobs for neighbors, hemming skirts, repairing shirts, adjusting dresses. Mercedes, who stayed by my side as much as she could, became my biggest promoter. "Mrs. Holloway works miracles with that needle," she'd tell everyone. Slowly, word spread. The first big order came from an older lady named Josephine who needed a dress for her granddaughter's wedding. I poured my heart into that dress, stitching it carefully. When she tried it on and saw herself in the mirror, she gasped, "I've never looked so elegant." She told others, and soon more clients arrived, first out of curiosity, then out of trust. I turned my dining room into a small atelier. Over time, I saved enough to buy a second, more modern sewing machine. Work became my therapy. With every garment I finished, it was as if I was sewing a new piece of my own life together. Just as my sewing business began to grow, someone from Walter's secret life knocked on my door, with 4 little girls who shared my son's eyes. In the next part, I'll show you how that unexpected visit changed everything again. One afternoon in 1973, there was a hesitant knock at my door. When I opened it, I saw Meline standing on the porch, thinner than before, with the youngest of her daughters in her arms. The other 3 girls clung to the gate, peeking in nervously. "Mrs. Holloway," she said softly, "I'm sorry to come like this, but I've run out of options." After Walter's imprisonment, her life had unraveled. The money he used to send stopped overnight. She lost the comfortable house he'd bought with stolen funds, what the court now considered assets linked to his crimes. She moved to a poor neighborhood, washing clothes for others to survive. 4 children, no steady support, no husband, no fantasy of a future marriage left. "I'm not asking for anything for myself," she added quickly. "But the girls, they aren't guilty of what their father did." I looked at those children, Christine around 10, serious and quiet, the twins Mary and Amy about 8, hiding behind each other, and little Elizabeth, just a toddler, with big eyes and the same chin, dimple my son has. They were my son's half-sisters. That thought hurt and comforted me at the same time. I invited them inside. I gave Meline some money, clothes, and food, far from enough to solve all her problems, but enough to pull her back from immediate desperation. "Whenever I can, I'll help," I told her. Not for Walter, not out of guilt. For those girls who had been dragged into his lies without any choice. When I told Vincent about their visit, he fell into a thoughtful silence. Finally, he said, "You did the right thing, Mom. Whatever he did, they're still my sisters." That Christmas, I did something that surprised even me. I invited Meline and the girls to spend the holiday with us. It was awkward at first. How could it not be? But children have a talent for breaking down walls. Soon the twins were running through the house, Christine was helping decorate the tree, and Elizabeth was sleeping in Vincent's old cradle. As we washed dishes together after dinner, Meline said, "I never imagined we would stand in the same kitchen like this. You have a generous heart, Mrs. Holloway." I shook my head. "If I keep carrying hatred, it will poison what's left of my life. I've had enough poison already." Helping them didn't erase the past, but it transformed some of the pain into purpose. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. But fate wasn't finished with Walter yet. In the next part, I'll tell you what happened when he died in prison and how, strangely, that news finally closed a chapter for me. In early 1974, news came from the prison. Walter was dead. A massive heart attack at the age of 52 had ended his life. Because I was still legally his wife, the authorities contacted me to ask if I wanted to claim the body or arrange a funeral. I declined. Vincent chose to attend the burial, more to face his own feelings than to honor his father. Almost no one else came. The man who once stood at the center of our small town died almost alone and was buried in a simple grave without ceremony. "How do you feel?" Mercedes asked me when she heard. I thought about it for a long time. I didn't feel joy. How could I celebrate the death of someone who, despite everything, had once been the love of my youth and the father of my child? But I didn't feel deep sorrow either. It was more like the quiet closing of a long, painful book. "I feel like I can finally move on," I answered. And I did. My atelier continued to grow. I hired assistants, young women who had skill with a needle and needed work. We began making wedding dresses and special occasion outfits that attracted clients from neighboring towns. People still remembered the scandal, but gradually my identity shifted from the woman whose husband tried to kill her to Mrs. Holloway, the talented seamstress. In 1976, Vincent graduated from law school with honors. Watching him receive his diploma, I felt a kind of pride that's hard to put into words. He had taken all that pain and turned it into a driving force. He became a prosecutor, determined to fight for justice so that people like his father wouldn't go unpunished. He wanted me to move to Richmond with him, but back then, I couldn't imagine leaving Millfield. I knew every stone in its streets, every sound of the church bells. My atelier, my clients, my memories, good and bad, were rooted there. Years passed. Malene found work as a school secretary in Richmond. Her daughters grew up and chose different paths: teaching, nursing, banking, art. Vincent kept in contact with them. It was a complicated relationship, but there was respect. They were tied together forever by the choices of a man who had failed them all. Life was steady, but something unexpected was about to happen again. A new chance at love that I never thought I'd be brave enough to accept. After surviving the worst a marriage can become, I never expected to say yes again. In the next part, I'll tell you how a quiet shopkeeper named Nathaniel slowly healed a part of me I thought was gone forever. Nathaniel owned a small grocery near the church. He was a widower, a man of few words, always polite, always carrying himself with a kind of quiet dignity. At first, he was simply a customer who occasionally brought me clothes to mend, an undone hem here, a missing button there. Then, slowly, his visits changed. He began arriving with a small bag of fresh fruit from his little farm on the outskirts of town. "For you and the ladies at the atelier," he would say, avoiding eye contact, almost shy. Later, it was chocolates or jars of homemade preserves. I didn't even notice what was happening until Mercedes teased me. "If you don't see how that man looks at you, Mrs. Holloway, you need new glasses." I was afraid. After what I had lived through with Walter, the idea of opening my heart again terrified me. Trusting another man seemed almost reckless. But Nathaniel was different. No grand speeches, no hidden agendas, no lies about brothers that never existed. He was transparent, steady, and kind, and over time, our conversations lengthened. We talked about simple things: crops, town news, his late wife, my sewing, my son's work as a prosecutor. He never pushed, never rushed me. In 1982, when I was 59, Nathaniel asked me to marry him. It was a modest proposal, full of sincerity, without roses or candlelight, but with something much more valuable: honesty. "Are you sure?" Vincent asked the night before the wedding. "You don't have to do this if you're uncertain. We're okay, just the two of us." "I'm sure," I told him. "I deserve a chance at a peaceful happiness." We married in a simple ceremony at the church, surrounded by family and a few friends. Nathaniel never tried to compete with my past or erase it. He accepted that Walter had been part of my life, that Vincent was a living reminder of that first marriage. "What's past is past," he would say. "What matters is the life we're building now." With him, I experienced a completely different kind of love: gentle, mature, and calm. We spent evenings drinking tea on the porch, weekends visiting his orange trees and chickens, and many nights just sitting together while I sewed and he read the newspaper. 13 years later, in 1995, Nathaniel died peacefully in his sleep. That loss hurt deeply, but it was a clean grief, the pain of losing something truly good, not the twisted agony of betrayal. At 72, I found myself a widow again, but this time with a heart that knew both the worst and the best of what marriage could be. After Nathaniel's death, I finally left Millfield and moved to Richmond with my son, and that's where a new chapter began, one where my story stopped being a secret and started helping other women. In the final part, I'll tell you how. When Nathaniel passed away, his absence filled every corner of the house. I'd set 2 cups for coffee, then realized there was no one to drink the second. The bed felt too wide. The days felt too quiet. Vincent insisted I move to Richmond. "Come live with us, Mom. The house is big. The kids would love to have their grandmother nearby," he said. By then, I was beginning to feel the weight of age. Tired legs, small memory lapses, the fear of falling ill alone. Mercedes had moved to live with her daughter in Washington. My former assistants had opened their own sewing businesses. Millfield, once my entire world, started to feel too empty. So in 1996, I sold the house donated my machines to a vocational school, kept a few special fabrics and keepsakes, and moved to Vincent's home in Richmond. Among the things I brought was one framed document that visitors always notice, the original obituary I found in Walter's drawer, the one that scheduled my death 3 days ahead of time. I sometimes call it my resurrection diploma. Living with my grandchildren brought a new kind of joy. Paul, the eldest, loved serious conversations and asked me about history and law. Mark taught me how to use a video game controller. Imagine an old lady pressing buttons to race cars on a screen. And little Julie would sit by my side watching me sew, fascinated by every scrap of fabric. "Grandma," she would say, "tell me again how you escaped from the bad grandpa." Vincent didn't like that nickname, but I always softened the story, turning it less into horror and more into a tale of a woman who decided not to die when everything was arranged for her to disappear. One day, at a community center event, they asked the elderly to share memorable moments from their lives. I told the story of the obituary in the drawer, the poisoned tea, and the way I took back control of my life. The room fell silent. Afterwards, a woman approached me in tears. "If you survived that," she whispered, "I can survive what I'm going through." From then on, I began telling my story more often, at schools, community groups, even in a documentary about domestic violence. Letters and messages reached me from women I had never met, saying that my story helped them find courage. And now, all these years later, I'm telling it to you. If there's one thing my life taught me, it's this. We can't always choose what others do to us, but we can choose not to let their evil be the final word. We can decide to stand up from the bed where they've already declared us dead, look them in the eye, and live. If you want more true stories like this, of survival, betrayal, and second chances, make sure you're subscribed and tell me in the comments what kind of story you'd like to hear next.